Good morning, Title I coordinators. Thank you for joining us today for our January webinar. I'm going to get our presentation pulled up. All right. As always, my name is Erin Suddeth, and I'm the branch manager for the Title I Part A Support and Improvement branch. And with me today, I have another colleague.
This is David Malonte, one of the assistant directors in the division.
You remember you can submit any questions or comments that you have during the webinar. You can put them in the chat if you're joining us on Teams. If you are watching on the media portal, you can send an email to me at erin.suddeth@education.ky.gov. And we do record and post all of our webinars on the Title I Documents and Resources webpage, so you can go back and watch this again if you need to. We have gone ahead and tried to mute all the mics and turn off all of the cameras just to ensure that everybody is able to focus on the presentation today. If you do have a question at the end and you want to unmute and you're on Teams, you can do the raise your hand feature, type something in the chat, and we should be able to unmute you. Yeah, recap from our December webinar. We talked about preparing for revised allocations and the things that you'll need to do when those are uploaded into GMAP. And we mainly focused on information about the release of the 2021 census data. And we're going to have more on that census data release in just a minute. Today's agenda, we're going to have updates and reminders kind of centering around that census data. And our big focus is going to be on the allowability of purchases. The tentative census poverty and hold harmless percentages for the 23-24 school year were released last week. Those came out on Tuesday, January 17th. You should have seen those both in the Commissioner's Special Tuesday message as well as an email from me that went out to everybody who's listed as a coordinator and in-person role manager. And as I just said a minute ago, we did talk about tentative census data more in depth in our December 2022 webinar. So if you haven't been able to watch that yet, I definitely recommend going back and doing that to really get more information about those, especially if you're new to Title I. You can use these tentative hold harmless percentages to begin planning for the 23-24 school year. And just another reminder that all of the numbers on that document are tentative and they are subject to change, but they should be able to give you kind of an idea for your planning. There is a challenge period that's provided by the Census Bureau if you think that there's an error in the data. Now, the only errors that can be challenged, they fall into two categories. So one is something related to like processing input data or the estimation models. And then the other category is something related to preparing or processing information related to the geographic boundaries for your school district. Districts can contact the Small Area Income and Poverty Estimates, or SAPE, branch at the U.S. Census Bureau for further information on how to challenge these data if you think that you have an error that falls into one of those two categories. Remember, the Kentucky Department of Education cannot revise your census data. And another important thing to keep in mind, and again, watch that December webinar for more details on this, is that the tentative poverty percentages that you're seeing reflect formula children based on data from the census. This is not based on data that you collect, like free and reduced price lunch or any data that KDE collects. It is all census data. And that challenge period ends on March 15th. So if you do want to get more information about that, like I said, you can contact the SAPE branch, and the PowerPoint was sent out to you today. It does have their phone number as well as their email address, and you just provide them with your name, address, telephone number, kind of all the basic information. And you can find more information and guidance on the challenge procedures on their website, which is linked in today's PowerPoint. So we're going to go ahead and move on to the main focus of today's webinar. As I mentioned, that is the allowability of purchases. And I know that many of you have heard about RAND, reasonable, allocable, necessary, and documented, countless times by now, but it is so important that it just bears repeating. These RAND principles help keep you in compliance, as well as help you avoid making unallowable purchases. For those of you who maybe are newer to Title I, purchases that are made with federal funds must be reasonable in amount, support the intent of the program or be allocable, be necessary to run the program, and be documented as addressing an identified need, something that's in your CSIP, your CDIP, your needs assessment. Now, what we see sometimes is maybe a website or a sales representative advertising their particular product as being able to be funded by Title I Part A. That does not automatically mean that the product meets program requirements and would receive approval from KDE. When we're talking about these product websites and these sales representatives, they may be experts regarding their company's products, but they aren't necessarily experts in Title I program requirements and allowability. As a reminder, KDE does not endorse or reject specific companies or vendors. We look at the specific product or service in question and determine if it would be an allowable purchase for that individual district or school. It's all very dependent on the individual district or school. So what we're going to look at today are just some hypothetical scenarios referencing some products that we as consultants have either seen on some applications, or maybe we've gotten a call or an email from a district asking if this would be an allowable purchase. Each of these items are available from multiple vendors at a variety of price points. So again, not singling out any particular vendor or anything. And so what we're going to do as we look at these hypothetical scenarios is just consider whether each purchase meets that reasonable, allocable, necessary, and documented RAND requirements. And the reason that I decided to cover this in the webinar is that, like I said, we have received questions regarding the following purchases from multiple districts this year. I did just kind of make up the amounts and the justifications based on a combination of information that I found on the different websites for these products. So I am not like referencing or quoting anybody's application here. As a reminder, all districts are required to have written allowability procedures for determining the allowability of costs in accordance with the terms and conditions of this federal award. And that requirement is part of the Uniform Grant Guidance. Specifically, it is 2 CFR 200-302. So if you were at our Brewstein thing and you got the purple book back in September, you can find that on pages 130 and 131 of that book. The questions that are on this slide are included in our Title I Part A allowability checklist that is available on our documents and resources page and could be a really good jumping off point to help you create your own allowability procedures if you don't already have those in place. So these are just some of the first questions that you should ask when considering whether or not a purchase is allowable. That document contains a lot more guiding questions, so this is just kind of getting us started. And these are the questions I want you to keep in mind as we're looking at each scenario. For reasonable, would a prudent person spend this amount on this particular product or service? And is a similar product or service available at a lower price? When we're thinking about allocability, does the product or service meet the intent of the Title I Part A program or the parent and family engagement component of Title I Part A? Is the product or service necessary for the program's operation? And finally, is the product or service addressing an identified need that's been documented in a CSIP, CDIP needs assessment? Our first scenario is take-home folders. So I know these go by a lot of different names: communication, connection folders, Friday folders. I know that we've all seen them, kind of the plastic folders, so they're tear resistant, and maybe they have little labels on the pockets. This pocket is take home, this pocket is return to school or keep at home. There's all kinds of different options out there. So the intention is to encourage organization by sending home, the graded assignments, permission slips, homework, all those different things in the folder each day. The parent checks the folder, sends anything back. A very quick internet search reveals countless vendors and packages of these different folders. So the example that I chose for our scenario is a pack of 24 folders for about $70. So it works out to just under $3 per folder. And let's look at the specifics of my hypothetical scenario here. So this is a school with 350 students. They'd like to purchase 17 of these folder packs so that they'll have just over 400 folders. It's going to be $1,190, and they're going to use parent and family engagement funds. Their total parent and family engagement allocation is $1,300. And here's the justification that they provided, let's say, on the GMAP budget. The folders allow teachers to engage with parents and send home important documents, including information about the Title I program. So let's think about some of the questions that your KDE consultant may have regarding this type of purchase. So first up is reasonable. When I was kind of doing research about all the different types of folders, I did find that similar folders are available at both much higher and much lower prices. Now, the lower price folders may not have the special, return to school, keep at home labels on them, but they accomplish the same purchase. So if I'm looking at this as the consultant or as the district coordinator who's going to approve this, and I see one company selling folders for $3 each and another company selling basically the same folder for, let's say, $1.50 each, it's clear that $3 each is not a reasonable price. So now let's think about allocability. When we're talking about the Title I Parent and Family Engagement Program, the intent is to foster two-way communication between the school or district and the parents, and that communication is supposed to help parents be actively involved in their child's education. Putting a piece of paper in a folder is not two-way communication, and it should not be the focus of your Title I Parent and Family Engagement Program. Obviously, you do have to send documents home and get documents returned, but again, that's not the focus of the program. And if we do the math here, we can see that this school has requested to spend over 90% of their entire parent and family engagement budget on these folders. That doesn't really leave them much money left to provide services that do meet parent and family engagement requirements, maybe provide some events and things like that. Are these folders necessary to run a parent and family engagement folder? The school could run a very successful parent and family engagement program without special take-home folders. Title I information can be provided to parents without the folders. Now, we're not saying that sending home flyers and things is a bad idea. It is definitely not, but a designated folder is not required for this. The information should also be shared through a variety of means. Send home a hard copy, post it on the school website, email, put it on social media pages, so it's more likely to be seen by more parents. And finally, documented. Are take-home folders the best or most effective way to address identified needs? Our second scenario is going to be agendas and calendars. Again, I know we've all seen these before, kind of spiral bound agenda books. They look like a day planner. There's space for students to write down their assignments, and then maybe depending on, the company, the vendor that's providing these, they might have additional features like they can put hall passes in there, or the school can add customized pages with their code of conduct or something like that. So in this scenario, we've got a school wanting to spend $2,000 for 600 agenda books, just a little over $3 per book. And let's look at the justification that they provided. Again, they're talking about parent and family engagement funds. And their justification said, agenda books are used so students can record and track assignments as well as set goals. Additionally, teachers can communicate with parents through the agenda books. Okay, when we think about reasonable, I did look around at a variety of these type of agenda books, and this seemed to be about the price range, $3 or so a book. So we could argue that this amount is reasonable, but remember that being reasonable in cost is not the only requirement for something to be an allowable purchase. In this scenario, we don't know how much of the total parent and family engagement budget would be used on this purchase. That could also play a factor in whether or not it would be deemed as reasonable. Now, when we're thinking about the remaining requirements, we're going to run into a lot of the same issues that we did with the folders. So first up, is an agenda or a planner an example of two-way communication with parents? There are some occasions, particularly in the primary and elementary levels, where a teacher may use a student's agenda to send home a note to parents, or maybe the teachers and the parents sign off as having reviewed the agenda to support an individual student's learning plan. But if we're talking about communicating with the parents of all of the students in the class or all of the students in the school, agendas and planners and putting notes in there is not the typical method of communication. It's also not an example of two-way communication, true two-way communication, that is. When we think about whether or not it's necessary, just like with the folders, agendas are not necessary for the program to function. And finally, they aren't addressing an identified need. Now, I did mention in this justification how sorry, not in the justification, when I was describing the different agendas that are available, some of them do have the ability to customize pages. So what if the school planned to customize some pages to include their parent and family engagement policy, or their compact, or maybe a calendar that has the different parent events on it? Does that play a factor in determining allowability? Not really. It would definitely be more cost effective for the school to print copies of those documents on regular paper, or incorporate them into their existing student handbook or something like that, rather than paying to have them incorporated into this special agenda. And as we previously stated with the take-home folders, those documents can also be made readily available to parents and students via email, webpage, social media, all kinds of different methods for getting that communication home. Our final scenario is a book vending machine, and these seem to have been becoming more popular in recent years. I know I've seen a couple different articles about them in different states, and we've again had several districts reach out with questions about these vending machines. So if you're not familiar, what these are is a vending machine that can be filled with books for students to purchase, not with actual money, but with special tokens that go with the vending machine. In this scenario, the school is requesting to spend $5,000 for the machine itself. It doesn't come with books in it. It's not for the tokens. It's not shipping costs or anything. So I did a little bit of research, and most of the book vending machines out there with the different vendors seem to be $4,000 to $6,000, and several were quite a bit higher than that, plus shipping. So we've got a lot to consider with this purchase. But before I forget, let's go ahead and look at the justification that this hypothetical school has provided. So they want to purchase one book vending machine, and their justification says students will earn tokens for positive behavior, attendance, and outstanding academic work. This will encourage reading and provide students the opportunity to take books home to read. The vendor has confirmed that this is an allowable purchase with Title I funds. So, okay, first let's look at the amount. $5,000 does seem a little bit high for one item, so let's really look at what this item does. As I said, the students get a special token, which must also be purchased from the vendor. So right there, that's an additional expense that we need to consider. And then they get to select a book from the machine. So could this same result be achieved for less money? I think so. If the school already has an existing bookstore or maybe a part of the library or something, the books and the use of some sort of token or certificate could very easily be incorporated there. It's just not going to, fall from a vending machine. We also need to think about expenses related to this machine, such as the shipping cost. So most of the websites I looked at, that was anywhere from $500 to $1,000. Replacing any tokens that get lost, which would be inevitable. Most of those, I forget how many tokens were in a pack, but most of those seem to be about $50. Of course, if the vending machine needs any repairs, that would be a cost down the road. And then obviously the books that actually go into the machine. The machine itself is not necessary to run the Title I program. So a couple other things to think about with this specific scenario and this justification. If you think back to our April 2022 webinar, which if you didn't watch that, that is still up on the webpage. We discussed some specifics about awards and incentives, and we talked about how awards and incentives must be low cost and they must be educationally related. So typically we're talking about ribbons and certificates or bookmarks, pencils, little things like that. The other thing that I'd point out is an article that was in our December newsletter. Again, that's available on our Documents and Resources webpage. And in that newsletter was kind of a, in case you missed it, from Title I Admin. There was a November 1st article from Title I Admin, which stated that Title I funds should not be used to pay for attendance incentives or other awards for participating in a school activity. And what the Title I admin article said was, according to U.S. Department of Education officials, this would be tantamount to paying students to attend class or related school activities. And if we look back at the justification in my example here, the slide does reference the students getting to earn the tokens for attendance awards. Now, this justification itself is taken from a video on one of the book vending machine vendors' websites. The video that I watched, it's very short, but it specifically recommends using Title I funds to pay for the machine. However, it doesn't mention important factors like aligning purchases to your needs assessment, CSIP, CDIP, the RAND requirements, or using funds to support evidence-based practices, nothing like that. I will say that in some of the different articles that I read about these vending machines, there were no references to using Title I funds to purchase them. Most of them cited community donations as their funding source for these vending machines. And as a reminder, I mentioned that Title I admin article. We did purchase Title I admin subscriptions for all districts this year. So if you are not yet taking advantage of that, you'll be receiving an email from me shortly about how you can do that and start getting those emails. So here's our key takeaways from these three hypothetical scenarios. First of all, as I said in the beginning, the district needs to develop processes and procedures for evaluating potential purchases moving forward. We recommend using the guiding questions on the allowable cost checklist that's on our webpage. That can kind of help you get started. And during monitoring, KDE staff do verify that written allowability procedures are, number one, in place, and number two, they are being implemented with fidelity. So these procedures should say, the school wants to make this purchase, here's who they contact, here's what that person does, just, 1, 2, 3, here's what happens in determining the allowability of a cost. Another key takeaway is to be specific on your application when necessary. Sometimes there are things that are very generalized. And if we had seen a specific thing like book vending machine, for example, in an application, that would have triggered some questions on our end. But if the description was so general that there's no mention of the book vending machine, that's where we can get into some kind of tricky areas there. Don't assume that Title I funds can be used for something based solely on the word of a vendor. And as always, ask your consultant if you're unsure about a purchase. Your consultants are here to provide you with technical assistance. That's the main component of our job. And I always like to remind that asking questions does not trigger any red flags or increase your district's chance of being monitored or anything like that. So even if you think the question is silly or you think I should really know the answer to this, go ahead and ask. It's better to just ask and get that confirmation than, potentially make a purchase that turns out to be unallowable. Okay, so I'm going to check. I don't think we have any questions in the chat, but I'm going to look at email. Okay, I don't see any in the email. Some last minute reminders before we leave. The 2023 National ESEA Conference is next week. This is hosted by the National Association of ESEA State Program Administrators, or NASPA. This is a hybrid event, so you can join virtually or in person in Indianapolis. There are over 100 sessions and 4 keynote speakers, and they're covering the many challenges faced in education, not just in Title I, all kinds of different programs. You can find additional information on the 2023 National ESEA Conference webpage, and registration is still open, even though it's next week. So if you want to do that, you can. This conference is aimed at coordination among federal education programs that are under ESEA and other federal programs. If you've been around for a while, you may remember this being known as the National Title I Conference. They are committed to sharing resources related to Title I and a number of other federally funded education programs. And there are participants from the state level, school level, district level, teachers, just all kinds of participants. And then finally, our upcoming webinar date. So our next webinar is going to be on Thursday, February 23rd at 10 a.m. And as I mentioned in the email with the PowerPoint, we do value your feedback, and we want to keep learning about what you find helpful and what you want to see more of, whether that's in a webinar or a newsletter or anything like that. You can submit comments, ideas, questions through our webinar feedback survey. It's completely optional and it is anonymous. And you can find a link to that survey in the email with the PowerPoint, as well as our Title I newsletters. And of course, you can always send those to me or your consultant as well. I'll do one last questions check. Okay, I don't see any, so we will go ahead and sign off for the day. Thanks for joining us, everyone.